26th at 7 p.m. Tonight, Finance respectfully asks that the City Council conduct a public hearing to consider placement of the calendar year 2017 delinquent solid waste collection fees on the Riverside County property tax roll, that it address any objections or protests received, and adopt resolution bill number 18-056 confirming and authorizing the levy of these delinquent fees as a special assessment. So with that,
Thank you so much. All right, questions or comments for staff? Don't all talk at once.
A quick question.
yes.
Do you know, and I don't know if anyone really knows, if the majority of the units are vacant?
I don't know that. Alex Brekovich is here from CRNR. I'm not sure if he's able to answer that question. No.
Okay.
If they are, well, I know that by resolution, even if a property is vacant, if they have running water, they're still required to have trash service. So if they don't have running water, they wouldn't be required. My assumption is most of these are not vacant.
And I didn't know that.
That is a fact. It's in the resolution.
Okay. The amount is substantial.
It is.
So,
But it is consistent with last year's and the year before's.
do you think they'll learn? Well, yeah, I was, really surprised, being that this is the second go-around, that the costs are so substantial.
Third go around.
Third go-around, okay. In any event, I just wondered if that was true because there was no one living there. Just a observation or question.
Any other questions or comments? So I have a couple.
Okay.
It's nice to see. So one thing that's disappointing is that when I look at the liens, the lowest lien is $12. And I think that it costs a little bit more money than $12 to put that lien. And that's why last year that I asked for an ad hoc committee to just make it that everybody pays their trash bill on their tax roll. So that every year we won't go through this and staff time to do this and time for CRNR to do this. Mm-hmm. But I do want to point out that this year there's about 250 less properties, so there's 250 more people that are actually paying their bill on time or paying their bill, and the amount this year versus last year is about $200 less for the top highest amount. So there's somebody that didn't pay like $1,200 this year that's getting lien. But again, I would like to see us move forward and continue to look at the option that trash is just billed through the tax roll and everybody pays it through their tax bill twice a year. But with that, this is going to be a public hearing, so I will open the public hearing. Is there anybody, Sarah, that would like to comment?
Sophia Lopez.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I was a recipient of the June 5th letter of hearing for CRNR, and I just moved to Hemet. I purchased a home in September, and I'm receiving the bill from the previous owner, the Peterman, that lived there. This bill does not belong to me, yet it's in my name, and it has my property address attached to it. I have spoken with CRNR a couple of times, and I have a different account number than the account number listed that is delinquent. My bill is current. I pay my bill every 3 months, and I have no balance. So my request is for my name to be removed from this bill of $209.22, which belonged to the previous owner, the people I purchased the house from. And that is all. I mean, I don't owe this, and I don't want my property attached to this bill. That is it. I would appreciate.
And this is one of those things that was not disclosed to you when you were going through that purchase. But Alex from CRNR, I don't know if you want to comment? Sure. Okay.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. Alex Brafich, CRNR. Be more than happy to address this issue. It's an issue that comes up quite often. All that we have to do is, and I'll get with her, but just show when you took over ownership of the house, and from that point forward. But her bill's current. It'll be fixed. It's not a big deal.
Thank you. You heard it from CRNR. Okay. Sarah, are there any other? Thank you, ma'am. Are there any other speakers? Okay. Seeing no other speakers, I will close the public hearing. Bring this back to council for comments, direction.
I move we approve this resolution.
Okay. Please vote. All right, that passes. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Lorena. Up next, item 24, existing Hemet Streetlight and Landscape Maintenance District for fiscal year 2018-19.
On June 12th of 2018, the City Council approved resolution numbers 4801 and 4803, initiating proceedings, and approved resolutions 4802 and 4804, declaring its intention to levy annual assessments for all existing streetlight and landscape maintenance districts, and to levy and collect assessments against lots and parcels within such district. Tonight, we are asking the City Council to hold a public hearing regarding the engineer's report and levy and collection of assessments for the existing Hemet Streetlight and landscape maintenance districts. And we also ask that Council adopt resolution bills numbers 18-040, 18-041, 18-042, and 18-043, approving the engineer's reports and levy and collection of assessments for the existing Hemet Streetlight and landscape maintenance districts for fiscal year 2018-2019.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments for staff? Okay, well, I guess it's making it easy. Nobody wants to comment. This is a public hearing item, so I will open the public hearing. Sarah, are there any requests to speak on this item?
No, there are not.
Okay, I guess everybody's okay with that lives within these districts to pay to have their lights and landscape. So with that, are there any other? Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, please vote. All right, that passes. Up next, item 25, Congress approved final CDBG budget allocations of $871,070. Acting CDBG Coordinator.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. For discussion, Council approved CDBG 1819 recommendations on August 24th. In January, there was HUD guidance that was issued. Let me read the notice number, CPD-19-18-01, and that said that the guidelines for filing the annual action plan had changed to stop duplication of effort in HUD and in local agencies from going in with a draft number and filling out the SF-424s for grant application, and then having to do them again when the final numbers came out. So HUD did not give us a timeline for the final numbers. They didn't give us a timeline for the actual filing of the annual action plan, so we were to continue going through our timeline and having the public hearings and having the final number and having council approval. So we did all that. As of April 24th, we were all good and tidy. So on May 1st, HUD sent a letter notifying the city of the final formula allocation And that allocation was increased from our anticipated allocation of $752,245. It increased $118,825 to $871,070. That is a final budgeted, congressional approved, president signed allocation. So we're good there. But we have to distribute those funds. So to distribute those funds, the ad hoc committee needs to review again, and the annual action plan will have to definitely be revised. So we're going to have additional public hearing time, public review time. So we kind of have to restart what we had already finished. So
What's the timeline?
Well, the one that we approved, that the number is no longer valid, has to be filed Thursday. So that revised annual action plan, there's no timeline. We have to, other than adhering to the 30-day public period for review and comment. So the final for this year for a revised annual action plan is August 16th, but I don't think we're going to make that with the one July council meeting on the 24th. So I anticipate that the end of August or the first meeting in September we'll have this revised annual action plan. However, in addition to revising the annual action plan, if the funds are, if the ad hoc review and recommendations to council move the money from one subrecipient to another, either an increase or a decrease, that triggers a substantial amendment. So we may have two functions that we have to accomplish before we can get a final annual action plan. But I think for this amount of money, it's probably worth the review time. It does increase, it will increase by about $25,000 money available to the public service agencies, and then the rest of it can be allocated out as the review triggers. So,
So we have to reestablish the ad hoc committee because, of course, we dissolved it, which tells us in the future not to dissolve it until all
right, but this was
have been addressed.
This was a one-time HUD guidance. I don't even know that it'll be the same guidance for next year. But anyway, could be something
The good
different.
thing is that we're getting an extra
Yeah.
where'd my number go? $118,000 coming back to the city.
It's
From
a
the past.
13% increase. It's a huge amount of money.
That's very good.
Well, we don't see that often. Okay, well, I, of course, still want to be on the ad hoc committee, so.
I'd be happy to stay on or
Okay.
rejoin the ad hoc committee.
So Bonnie and Russ back on. We'll bring that ad hoc back to life. Sarah, did you get that? Okay.
Was there anything else you needed to add?
No, unless you just want more blah blah. I think we're good here. Okay.
Just for clarification,
Yeah.
on you said that the recommendations that we did previously as the ad hoc, that has to be filed Thursday, but there is no timeline for us to submit a subsequent review of it.
Yes. Annual action plan can be revised anytime, any year. It just, in our particular case, we need to revise it because we can't get it done by this Thursday.
And so our internal target would be August or September.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay,
Very
thank
much.
you.
Nice to get money back,
Right.
like a tax refund.
Up next, the item that everybody's been waiting for. We need to make a motion to bring the ad hoc back with Bonnie and Russ. Please vote. Okay. Very good. Okay, so the much anticipated item number 26, fiscal year budget 1819, preliminary operating budget, Mr. City Manager.
At the last council meeting, we had presented both an A budget and a B budget. The A budget depended on Measure U funds. The B budget did not. And then I was asked to bring back a C budget that somehow cut the baby in half or something.
Before you get on with your presentation, can I just ask one question? In all three budgets, A, B, and C, is Measure U funds being used to pay for public safety?
For public safety?
Are Measure U funds in all three budgets being used for public safety?
Finance director saying yes.
Okay, thank you.
Be my guest.
So just to review the three options that we have presented to council, and maybe just to backtrack a little bit. When we began this process, we came to council to inform council that with the existing budget submissions and the requirements to cover our costs, we were looking at a $3.5 million structural deficit in the general fund. Several factors have contributed to this deficit. The major factors include a rise in pension costs and the MOU increases for salary and benefits to public safety. For fiscal years 18-19, the city's CalPERS payment obligation increased by over $1.6 million. While we are seeing continued signs of economic growth, the expenditures continue to outpace the revenues. So early January, we presented option A to the council. Option A used $1.7 million from Measure U funds to pay for the general fund portion of the public safety salary and benefit increases. In addition to that, the city manager recommended to freeze vacant positions in general fund to realize $1 million in savings. Filling any vacant position in the general fund would be at the city manager's discretion. And to make up the difference, the city manager recommended to use $800,000 in fund balance from three internal service funds, the Workers' Compensation Fund, the Liability Fund, and the OPEB Fund, or the Retiree Medical Fund. Council asked that we bring back a different option that did not use Measure U funds. So option B, which was presented last week, had no use of Measure U funds, continued with freezing the vacant positions to realize the $1 million in savings, used $1.5 million in fund balance from the three internal service funds that I previously mentioned, eliminated funding for the equipment replacement for all general fund departments, $517,000 total, eliminated funding for three facilities deferred maintenance projects, which were recarpeting the first floor of City Hall, painting buildings throughout the city, electrical panel inspections, and air duct cleaning at the PD facilities. That was the savings of $505,000. And finally, reducing training and education and conference budgets in all general fund departments by half, except PD, because most of their training is reimbursed by post, realizing a savings of $87,000. When we brought that option to council, the city manager was asked to bring a third option, which would have kind of a combination of the two. So the third option that we present tonight uses $2 million from Measure U funds. And the way this amount was arrived at is, this amount is $1 million per year in surplus revenues above the $10 million projected revenues for fiscal years 2017-18 and 2018-19. Continuing to freeze the vacant positions to realize the $1 million in savings, using $509,000 in fund balance from the three internal service funds, and restoring the equipment replacement, so no longer using equipment replacement funds, restoring facilities deferred maintenance projects so that when those projects come up and they're ready to start on them, they can go forward with those. And restoring the training, education, and conference budgets for all general fund departments.
I want to address the Measure U and Option C. Option C was estimated at $10 million of revenue per year, and that was based on an estimate from our consultant, HDL, that does the sales tax forecast for us and reports on actual sales tax. The fire chief and the police chief then prepared budgets, approximately a 5-year budget of hiring and spending Measure U funds within that $10 million. So their program for last year, for this year, for the next 3 years deals with $10 million maximum expenditures. In reality, $11.3 million is going to come in. That's based on our forecast. So when we go back to address the funds, we're only talking about $1 million of the $1.3 million surplus, which doesn't threaten any of the program that the fire chief and the police chief have come up with, and then I guess the Measure U committee has blessed. And so we're not jeopardizing that at all. There's a vote of the committee that says nonetheless their preference is that we not touch any of that money, but nonetheless we brought back what we brought back. And so that's the difference in the budget and why we came up with the use of the Measure U funds that had never been allocated for anywhere in those 5 years of budgeting. There. Let's do the next one. There was some concern raised regarding the savings that we forecast. I had mentioned previously that savings was equal to about 4% of the general fund budget, not Measure U, just the general fund budget. That I've worked in cities where we've done as much as 10% projected savings overall due to retirements, firings, people quitting, etc. When you put a budget together, you don't do actual salaries. In this particular case, Lorena has put the salaries in at midpoint. And so there's going to be some over, and there's going to be a lot that's under that too. And so in some cities, they do the highest. What's the maximum you can pay? But nevertheless, there is built in a savings because of what's going to happen in actuality and what you normally experience. And so our projection is 1.963 based on the 4% figure and based on each of these positions that are currently vacant. And so we're simply being conservative and putting in the budget 1 million, not the full 1.9. So there's a factor built in there. In terms of actual hiring, obviously we're not going to say no to hiring six police officers. But the reality is it may take him the full year to hire all 6 if he can hire 6 people. So there's going to be a graduated savings throughout the year, even in the police positions, because the 6 are currently vacant. We hit July 1st shortly. And so he's not going to have those 6 officers start July 1st or August 1st or September 1st. And so we're going to have a built-in salary savings in there. And so that's pretty much how it works. If the position is absolutely needed and essential, obviously 6 police officers are essential, I will approve the hiring process, which will take months, if not a full year. So that's why I am, anyway, based on my prior experience, comfortable with taking the $1 million savings and forecasting that as part of the overall expenditure savings in the budget. And then I would believe it's important to note the various services that we restored as a matter of the Measure C budget, equipment replacement, etc.
Questions for staff?
Kind of a relatively simple question, probably for the city manager. I understand that public safety training is not affected by any of these options, but training and conferences for non-public safety would be. And would there be, primarily looking at the option B, if we were to go that route, I'd want to make sure that if there's any certificated training that comes to mind, building inspectors, if there's any certification training that they would have to be current to enforce building codes, if that training would be considered similar to what you're saying, any request for hiring or filling positions would be filtered through your office. Would you do the same with training?
Yeah, anything dealing with required certification, the answer would be yes. There's training that I would go to, quote unquote training, which is the city managers conference this year. I think it's in Baltimore, that I'd eliminate because it's not certificate required or anything like that. But specific to your comments, yes, they would be allowed.
Yeah, and I certainly understand the value added to having staff go to conferences, even though it may not be specific training. There's always a value to rubbing shoulders with counterparts in different cities and finding out other options, like we heard tonight of a program in the city of Clovis that might be worth looking at. So there's an abstract value associated with conferences, but as far as the mandated and certificated training that you need to do your job, I couldn't come to that same conclusion. But thank you for that.
Linda?
Okay. Just a couple things. Thank you for the position printout. That, and you're absolutely right. When you have positions vacant, it does take, when you decide to fill, it does take a long time. I just want clarification on a couple items, in particular the 6 police officers and the dispatch.
Right.
That's on the, quote, general fund
Yes.
side of the equation. That's all general fund. It does not pertain to any of the officers or the dispatch that are in the process of being hired under the Measure U side.
No.
Okay. My next question, or actually it's more of a comment before I get into the final one, is that just to point out that, our structural deficit was wiped out at the time that we franchised the trash company. And we were, as we thought at that particular time, for about a 4 or 5, 6 month period of time, that we were really okay. We had the money in reserves. We had a lot of money in reserves. We had enough that everything was flowing smoothly. And then dear Governor Jerry Brown decided that he needed to balance the state of California budget by taking redevelopment funding away from all of the cities and counties. At that point, we fell back into the deficit that we are still struggling with today. So I just, get that sarcastic. Thank you, Jerry Brown, for everything you've done for us. And I also understand that the city today and of the future is not going to be the same in delivering services as it was 20 years ago. However, we have to be very mindful when we go out and look at different options on service deliveries that we are getting the best bang for the buck, and that we are also delivering those services in the best effective manner. Now, my question on, I guess it's option C, is that you have taken the overage from, or the excess of over $1 million or $10 million in Measure U funds to use in balancing the budget. What happens next year and the year after? if Measure U funds come in at 900,000 or 9 million or 8 million, and public safety does not have the money to continue with their 5-year plan? Is it going to come out of general fund?
I pointed out to the Measure U committee yesterday that the funds are interrelated. Measure U came in and affected the general fund because of the raises we had to give that were not to come out of Measure U by policy decision. And that was $1.7 million per year for the raises. So they're really interrelated. And so, I mean, the answer becomes, let's assume it's 9 million next year and we're $1 million short. May have to come out of the reserves, the $8 million for the rainy day.
But see, that's my point. If the reserves, if the Measure U excess funds are left in their reserves, we're going to have to work a hell of a lot harder to bring in businesses and find ways to cut costs so that it doesn't come out of our reserves and then it doesn't have to come out of the general fund.
There will be reserves. They're not going to spend $10 million this year.
No,
they're probably not going to spend $10 million next year. So there are reserves that carry over. I think if I remember right, at the end of the 5-year period we're talking about, there's still going to be around $2 to $5 million worth of reserves that are unspent in the Measure U funds, not necessarily general fund, but in the Measure U funds. So the other part of it is you know, we can't forecast the recession or whatever, but the general funds sales tax has been pretty consistent for the last few years. If we run into a recession or whatever, you know, we're back behind the 8 ball, no doubt about it. But this does keep your $8 million intact as reserves. And so from a financial standpoint, short run, 2-3 years or whatever, you're still okay. In fact, if you lowered your reserves to $4 million, you've ended the structural deficit. You know, a magic. But from an actual operational standpoint, we want to respect the 20% reserve set aside for that rainy day, and just hope that the rainy day isn't Measure U funds.
I have more comments, but I'll leave them for later. Thank you.
I'm going to bring up internal services again, because we've asked for several years to make sure that they're very transparent and that we know exactly what the costs are at for any given department. I looked at the budget, and they're included in some departments and not included in others. And that's concerning to me. When I go back to Internal Services Fund, it seems like they're taken out again there for the same departments that was taken out in the first place. And PD for one, that's one of them, where they have, I think, a $2.5 million for internal services. And you go back in internal services, back in its own section, and it has internal services taken out, or those costs taken out again under PD's costs. So it's all very confusing, and along with the city attorney's fees. Now, they are what they are, but they're listed in some departments, and they aren't there in other departments. So why aren't we given a budget which shows, you know, if you're going to do that, take it out of all the departments and put it simply just in the internal services section under the department that way, and list it that way so that it's very transparent, rather than shovel it around in every section of the budget. So I have some concerns about that. The other concern I have is there's areas, I'm wondering if the budgets from 17, 18, for an example, department budgets, if they aren't spent, if that's money not spent, did it just roll over into 1920 or 1819? Or were new monies allocated again?
If you have an encumbrance process, you would encumber the money in 17, 18, and then spend it in 18, 19. And so, the general rule, if you don't encumber it, it should go back into the general funds, and then you reallocate it
Right.
through the budget process.
Right. Yeah, but, well, I'm just going to pull this up because I'm familiar with it. We allocated $50,000 for grant services. Now, I don't think we used $50,000. Did we, Chris? We used $50,000.
Of general fund or water?
And you're talking about water?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you know, sometimes it would be nice to see what some of this money was actually used for, because I only know of 2 applications or so that were submitted. 3. Okay, so are you saying then we're allocating another $50,000?
Good evening. So if you're looking at the water budget,
Yeah.
we did retain that line item for additional consultant help with future grants. So the initial line item for 17-18 was for our Green Project Reserve grants, 2 of them, as well as an SRF application.
Right.
So that did expend that $50,000 because they run about 25,000 around.
Okay.
And so looking forward and knowing that we're still going to need some assistance and wanting to go after those alternative funding sources, we did retain that line item in the water operating budget this year.
Okay. So we've said it over and over and over again with regards to the PERS liability, 40% increase, approximately 40% increase, correct?
I don't know that it's a 40% increase.
Approximately 40%?
No, I think just off the top of my head, our PERS liability is well in excess of $7 million a year. And the increase for 18-19 is $1.6 million.
It's what?
$1.6 million. And that's just the unfunded liability portion. Then there's the normal cost. The normal cost only increased, I believe it was less than 1% of salaries. So it's not 40%, but our PERS rates are pretty steep. And one of the things that many people don't realize is that when we get our PERS valuations sent to us, where they tell us what percentage of payroll we're supposed to charge,
Right.
that information is 2 years old. That means that the salary increases that hit our budgets in 17-18 and will hit our budgets in 18-19, we won't even see the unfunded liability cost for that until 19-20 and 2021. So we're going to play a lot of catch-up in those years.
And, you know, I think that's my point, is that a lot of this is not mismanagement of funds as to why we're in a deficit. We have done a lot to bring ourselves, I mean, I can remember when the deficit was 5 million, 5 point something million, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. So you cut, it's not a matter of overspending. I mean, we're cut pretty far to the bone. And all the other mandates, unfunded liabilities that we have that are out of our control, that certainly not in our control, play a big part. And it's good for the public to recognize that mismanagement of funds is not a question here at all. I would like to see a little bit better transparency, though, on those fees that I mentioned earlier. And I had another question about building department. I was looking at the same number of employees, but it increased by $150,000. The budget increased by $150,000. So I have a question with regards to that.
Building department increase to salaries.
Okay, which budget are we in?
Building.
C? Budget C?
Oh, I'm just looking at the big book.
Well, all I can tell you in terms of building is that we have not added any positions.
I know, I saw that.
Over what were budgeted, so I don't.
So I noticed but there was an increase in that of $150,000. So I saw that there weren't any additional employees by any means. We all know how short we are there. But the budget increased by $150,000. Let me see if I can find that.
Are you on page? What page?
Oh, here we go. You know, I've got so many sections that I looked at.
So are you looking at page 2 of option C?
I'm not looking at option anything here.
Oh, okay. I just want to see the numbers.
I'm looking in this big book and seeing by department, okay?
Okay.
And looking at the budget for the department and noticing that when on the employee side, or let me pull that out. I don't have tabs, obviously.
So just for some clarification for Bonnie, that the big book that she's looking at would have been option B that we got at the last council meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Wait a minute.
Oh. Okay, so the only change that there was in building, it wasn't in salaries. We didn't add anything. We did add $40,000 in plan check services because we're bringing in more than that in terms of revenue, and we were always coming back mid-year and asking for a contract amendment. But we're never spending more than what we're taking in as revenue. We're taking in the revenue, sending it out for plan check if it's complex, and it's coming back. So our revenues outpace our expenditures for that service.
I'm going to look around for it again.
Okay. And I'd be happy to help you if I know what page
Yeah, I didn't mark up my book. I made notes on my other stuff. So when I find out,
But in terms of salaries, we did not add new positions in
yeah,
building.
I realized that. I said I saw that there were no increases in personnel.
Yeah.
However, and I guess that's why I just questioned the fact that it was $150,000 more.
Lorena's pointing out that overall in the budget, there's a decrease for building.
And that's in
This year.
both option B and C.
Well, I'll find what I was looking at, and get back to you.
While she looks at that, Linda.
Okay, thank you. Question in both planning or plan check and building, when the load gets too high, too heavy, we use contract help, we don't hire another person to temporarily fill a position.
Correct.
Okay, that's all I wanted verification. Thank you.
Brief pause. I want to respond to one of Bonnie's statements. There's absolutely no accusation here that the city council, past years, whatever, has done anything wrong. Much of this was caused by the state. Much of this was caused by CalPERS increases. As I mentioned previously, they're talking about public safety going up to 60% of payroll in the next few years. I mean, this is crazy. And so it's not just us. The League of California is very concerned. There's been an article put out by the city managers as a group saying, they don't know how their cities are going to survive that. Governor Brown has told us, go pound sand. It's our problem. It's not the state's problem. And so a lot of what has happened is a result of the circumstances of being a city in a tough state. And so we're not making any accusation whatsoever. We're not accusing the Measure U committee of everything. We're just playing with the hand that's been dealt us. Period. Okay, and we've given some options as to a way, to change the game or whatever a little bit.
Harley?
Would you go back a slide or two to the option summary page? Oh, yes, there you go. It's okay, she's kidding. I mean... All right, I don't necessarily have a question. I look at the different options, and I would probably pick A still instead of C. You go to the different options on B, and while they sound good, if we are going to defer facility maintenance, our buildings are already old. And could you imagine working in the police department and them not doing the cleaning of the decks? I wouldn't want to work in there. I'm just saying personally, I wouldn't want to work in there. And I don't know. And the other thing is the reducing training and education. Running a business and an operation as large as we do, I mean, our number one complaints are about customer service. And so if we are going to reduce the training, that's just going to get worse, in my opinion. And that's the largest number of complaints that I receive. So it may be selfish on my part, but our citizens deserve, to be treated. And it takes constant work. And so sometimes a morale problem can cause maybe nastiness or complacency at their job, and then it gets taken out on the residents of our city. And then that goes back along with like the building painting. If we're doing all this work, the police department and the fire department is doing all this work on our streets, but the citizens have to look at, ripped up buildings or... I don't know, you just look at all of it, and if we're going to move forward, it has to be together. And the together part we're missing.
What is missing is a recommendation from the city manager. Thus far, we gave you A, you asked me to come back with B, and then you asked me to take a little bit of A and a little bit of B. In terms of solvency of services, maintaining equipment, replacement funds, etc., maintaining some degree of certificates or whatever. Option C is the best for me in terms of my recommendation. When it comes to the Measure U, it deals only with the surplus. It doesn't deal with the $10 million whatsoever. It maintains that intact, which is the budget for police and the budget for fire in terms of what they've asked for and been blessed by the Measure U committee. There's no reduction. There's surplus in that. And so we have a boon that came in, $1.3 million that was never forecast. And so that's what we're talking about, touching. $1 million of that $1.3 million, the other $300,000 would go, into the Measure U whatsoever. So I know there's been policy decisions, and I know the Measure U committee has a stance, and there's concern about the fact that eventually we were going to take Measure U funds and spend it on other general fund purposes and such, and that's been the accusation. In this case, we're dealing with a surplus that was never forecast. We're not impacting the Measure U budget whatsoever, and so the city manager's recommendation is option C.
Okay, my turn. I want to thank you for the work that you guys have put into this, because I know it's painstaking and it takes a lot of hours to do that. There's some comments that were made about Jerry Brown and the state of California, and we're just trying to go with the hand that's being dealt. I know that there's been comments made by some other people, a member of the Measure U Oversight Committee. I was at the meeting on Monday, and some comments that were made that the city has not addressed, and somebody brought it up over here about the structural deficit, and the comment was that the structural deficit has not been addressed over the years, for many years, and I would like to beg to differ on that. I haven't been on council, and three of us haven't been on council for very long, but I think that the previous council did a lot of good in trying to reduce and make cuts where they could. I mean, our staffing levels are at bare bones. When people come in to get those building permits and to start building, we need to have people there that can get them through the process efficiently. And if we continue to make cuts from those positions, they're not going to come to Hemet to build and open their business. They're going to go to a neighboring city where customer service is top priority. So I think that the city has addressed, and this council has addressed over the years, even before I got on council, and previous councils I think have done that to make cuts and to bring the deficit down, and I think they've done a good job. And I think that you've done an outstanding job bringing balanced budget options to us. And I know it's difficult to do. But one of the things that's kind of frustrating for me is the Measure U, even in option A, $1.7 million used from Measure U to pay for general fund positions. And there was a comment made at the last budget meeting that there wasn't anything said about non-Measure U public safety employees and Measure U. Well, does that mean that if the chiefs purchase equipment under Measure U, if I'm a non-Measure U employee, do I not get to use that Measure U equipment because I'm not Measure U? I mean, are we going to get to that point? And I think the answer should be no, because the purpose of the Measure U Oversight Committee and the resolutions that were passed and the Measure U itself were the spirit behind it was this city needs to increase public safety. And let's be honest with ourselves, is that had Measure U not passed, the MOUs that we're talking about covering with Measure U money to pay for public safety, those MOUs would have never been signed, never been agreed to, because where would the money come from? So this council made a decision to bring our police department and our fire department up so that we could get more people to want to come here, for one, and hopefully not have our people do a mass exodus for two. And so I think that it's very important that while, yes, the previous employees are not Measure U employees, they're still public safety officers. And they're here because they want to be in Hemet. And that MOU I know there's been talks, we're not going to get the raises coming out of that. Public safety was a priority of the citizens of this community, and giving those raises kept people here, but it also enticed other people to come. had that not gone through, I think we would still not be, we wouldn't be where we're at today in public safety. I don't think the fire department would be fully staffed. I don't think the police department would be up 16, is it 16? 16 officers. We may be up a few, but I don't think we would be at 16. And I don't think the people that are actually out on the streets, and I drive through Hemet every day. I have an office here. And I see a difference, and people that I talk to see a difference. And that's what the spirit of Measure U was for. Looking at your options, even if we were to go with option A and say 1.7 million for Measure U funds to pay for general fund positions, those are still public safety, and that's what the resolution states, is that the money's spent on public safety. So whether you were a police officer or a firefighter that was here before Measure U, you're still in public safety. You're not in public safety. So I think that's important, and that message hasn't been getting out there very much. We're just taking from the general fund to pay for them, or we're taking from Measure U to pay for to balance the general fund. Well, no, we're paying if we were to go with option A, we're going to take from Measure U to pay for public safety, and that's what the charge of the people were in passing Measure U. And I know there was a comment made that Measure E, prior to Measure U, failed by 600 votes. And Measure U passed at 60-40, which was actually 62-38. So it still passed at a very high percentage. So people in this community knew that public safety was a #1 priority for this community. And I think all of these, even if option A and C, I think those still meet that criteria. And it troubles me when people that work here in this, have businesses and they make a comment that they're not Measure U employees. Well, they're public safety employees. Whether they were hired pre or post Measure U, it's still public safety. It's still one public safety, one police department, and one fire department for public safety. And it's frustrating for me that we are there's division, even in the letter that we received from the Oversight Committee, because there's, they are doing their job, looking at the public safety Measure U to make sure that money that comes in is being spent on public safety. And it will be. And that's what I think is important to note. And it's not about, in some language that's in this letter that we received, is that it's not about technical wording, it's the actual wording that's in the resolution that any of these options fit with under. So for me, I know Carly said option A, but option C is not much different than option A. It restores equipment replacement. It keeps facilities where they both have hiring freezes. I think there's probably some departments that need some more personnel so that we can get more development and more building and get the city moving again. So for me, I think my position is to go with the city manager's recommendation.
Can I key off what you've just been talking about? And it's not specific to A, B, or C options on it. I've been here 9 months, maybe 10 months, whatever, and it amazes me that a measure that was supported almost, 2/3 to 1/3 or whatever can cause divisiveness among the city. You had a large proportion of the city support Measure U. Everything we're dealing with the budget is supporting Measure U and public safety. And I feel like there's entities within the city that are kind of tearing it apart a little bit. And so it's frustrating to me not to always be able to work with the police and fire chief, to be unanimous, to be on the same page, etc. It's frustrating to me to be at odds with a Measure U committee. My job here is to help bring this all together and live happily ever after. And so I'm just kind of pleading that we're on the same page here. We may take a different road, etc. You may take a different road than my recommendation, but hopefully we end up at the same point, and that's a great degree of solvency and still a good level of services here. So, end of
And I agree, and I know that, there's for the people that voted no on Measure U, who wants to pay more in taxes, right? Nobody really wants the level of expectation of service